So let us continue with our discussion. So we're still on the lexical thematic level. There is a term called a verbal icon or verbal structure. So if you see in Dickinson's poem, the first line tells you about a metaphor of something. Fame is a fickle food. However, in a verbal icon or a verbal structure, the whole poem is representative of something. A whole poem itself becomes a self-contained imagery of something. So instead of just one line, instead of just one unit of thought, we consider a whole poem is referring to something. Now this is a very it requires a very complex understanding and analysis, and we cannot just look at one stanza to understand this. However, because we want to explain things in an efficient way, we just look at one stanza of the Ode to Grecian Urn. You can also look at the more deeper analysis in the book, and I advise you to do so. So the Ode to Grecian Urn, thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. So, who is thou? Thou is the more archaic, older forms of you. You are unravished because unravished is fresh, yeah, unspoiled, fresh. Fresh bride of quietness, it is a virgin bride of quietness. The bride whose husband is quietness. Yeah. You are the foster child of silence and slow time. So there is a difference between quietness and silence and slow time. Sylvan, that is natural. Natural historian, or a person who records. Who canst thus, who canst is the older form of can. Yeah, the model can, not the item like tin can or metal can. I can, something like that. The example is I can, the ability, showing the ability. Who can express, thus is because of that, means because of that. Who can, because of that, because you are the unravished prize, because you are the foster child, you can express a flowery tale, a beautiful tale, more sweetly than our rhyme, than just lyrics. So, we call that paraphrasing. So when you try to make meaning out of poetry by reading the lines and change the words so that it has clearer meaning or a different but still related meaning, yeah, it has to be still related, derived from the poem itself, you call that paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is doing that, is paraphrase in Indonesian. You try to make meanings out of the poem lines. Yes. So the whole poem is actually a huge metaphor, a huge complex metaphor of poetry itself. So the Grecian urn is a poem or poetry. Grecian urn is poetry. That is the metaphor for this what you call that, for this particular piece of poetry. For this poem, the Grecian urn represents poetry. Yes, so that is a verbal icon, a verbal structure. A whole poem itself becomes a self-contained imagery of something. The closed and self-contained structure of the vase, or the vase, yeah, if you're more American pronunciation, the vase becomes a model for poetry. The image of the vase therefore serves a triple function. It is a symbol of Victorian art. If you remember Grecian urn, they have a lot of drawings on its surface, layered, like levels or stages of people doing things, usually in a Grecian is Greek, yeah, Grecian urn, Grecian vase, that is the same thing. Symbol for pictorial art as a model of for the form of poetry and as a concrete object in itself is an urn, is a vase, yeah, you can touch it. Concrete object which refers to the abstract theme of transitoriness and eternal flame. So let's move on to Imagism. Imagery is contained within Imagism. Yeah. Imagism is the condensation of poetry into powerful, essential images. Poetry should achieve the utmost clarity of expression without the use of adornment. So, imagery tries to condense things. Like, for example, you remember the food is a fickle, sorry, fame is a fickle food. So it's condensed, and you can extract so much understanding out of it. At least for good poems, yeah, not terrible poems. For good poems, you could extract a lot, and it makes you think about things in a different way. An idea is that poetry, in an idea in Imagism, in the way of thinking of Imagism, is that poetry should achieve the utmost clarity of expression without the use of adornment. Adornment are considered extra, or in this case, in the Imagism way of thinking, non-essential or useless in a way. Extra words, even extra imagery or extra understanding is not good. The good thing is short. Keep it simple, keep it short, keep it powerful in that way. It is better to present one image in a lifetime than produce voluminous works. It means like this. Compare these two things. I can give you, for example, in this line from Emily Dickinson, an essay about what fame is. Fame is like, you cannot really touch on fame, it's unreliable, it will betray you, whatever, whatever. It's very long. It is it is somewhat inefficient. However, if you just put it in a line, fame is a fickle food. It is much more powerful. The idea is very clear. The thing is there, and you can see it, and just with one glance of this beautiful line, fame is a fickle food, you get the point of the essay, of 2 or 3 pages essay I wrote about how fame is blah blah blah. You can condense that into one imagery. Fame is a fickle food, and you capture all of it beautifully, easily. So that is what Imagism is trying to talk about. It's better to present one good image, that is, in a lifetime than produce voluminous works. It is because it's effective, very effective. So you probably have heard of the impression, one picture is worth is worth thousands of words. A picture is worth 1,000 words. It is very true in our age that you would choose to watch a YouTube video than to read a book, which is very true, yeah. You just you want to see things in picture, and you understand that directly. A good analogy is this. I can go on into a very long speech about a person is beautiful. How I met this girl, for example, and she is very beautiful. I can use so many things to describe her, but all of that will be defeated by just you taking one look, one picture of that girl, and you understand that completely. Yes, you understand that completely, how that girl is beautiful or not. Yeah. Basically, you can make the judgment right there and then just by looking at the picture. So this is what Imagism is trying to relate to. The example is there in a station of the metro. The apparition of these faces in the crowd. Petals on a wet black bough. How is it considered a very condensed picture. Okay, let's look at it step by step. The apparition, the ghost, the spiritual. This has several meanings. The apparition, it could mean the ghost. It could mean the spiritual essence. It could mean the true identity. Yes, of these faces. So faces of what? In the crowd, of course, these are human faces. The human is the human face is the personality of a person, the individuality of a person. It is what makes a person. Then there's the eye, the window to the soul, etc. The face, it can also mean the thing that you want to show to people, like putting up faces or a mask, so to say. That when you say uh, you try to put on a smiling face when you're actually angry, something like that. So it can mean first the apparition is like the death, the ghost, the true essence, the spirituality of people, or the masks that people wear, or the personality of people that we see, or because the face does not really show you your inner self. It can also be something that is misdirection. A handsome person can be evil, for example. A beautiful person can be nasty, even though they have beautiful faces. And in the crowd, so it is a indistinguishable uh, bunch of people. There is no individuality, yet you talk about faces. So in this line is more condensed than what we see in the Dickinson poetry. That's why this poetry only has 2 lines, because it aims to be very effective, very condensed. So that is the explanation for Imagism. And we move on to the second level of poetry, which is the visual dimension. The visual dimension is not imagery, so when you think about food, for example, a fame is a fickle food. You imagine something in your head that you see food, yeah? This is not the visual dimension. The visual dimension is what you actually see with your eyes on the page. So you see there's 2 examples of the visual poetry, visual poems, or the term is the concrete poems. Yeah. Concrete poetry takes a further step towards visual art, concentrating on a poem's shape or visual appearance. It's very straightforward. So, for example, in the book, you see the poetry about spirituality, about God. It is written that when you see those words, it is arranged almost like an altar, like a picture of altar in the page. So it's very visual. And E. E. Cummings' poem on loneliness, you see here, yeah, here. A leaf falls, so it is written like leaves falling, and the loneliness, L singular, I mean alone, and one is alone, and L is alone, and I-ness, I centered, looking at me, I, only I. So it has a very deeper what we call that thought given into how a poem should be presented visually. Or it can be very fun, like the Apple poem made by a German poet. I forgot his name. Is it Dolt? Dolt? I forgot, sorry. Uh, you can find it on the internet because this is English literature, not German literature. So, an Apfel. The Apfel, the word Apfel, which is apple, is written like an apple. So that is the visual art of poetry. I think it's very obvious, very straightforward. It's a traditional and experimental poetry which often uses and combines the pictorial aspects of language and writing. So it tries to merge the visual and the meaning level of poems. It attempts to turn a poem into a quasi-material object. So the poem itself is the object, which can be achieved not only to a thematic level, thematic, through the use of concrete nouns and scenes like an imagery, but also on the visual level, on the eye level, what you see on the page through a particular layout of letters, words, of stanzas. So I think that's all for this part of the video. And we will continue next to perhaps the most technical, which is about the uh, rhythmic acoustic level of poetry. Thank you.